Hello and welcome to the photography show. My name is Lydia Malamed Johnson. I'm the executive director of APAD and the fair we're currently in. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you today to this panel. For the fourth consecutive year, it is an honor to welcome the MUUS Collection as our lead cultural partner and to host their presentation of Rosalind Fox Solomon, What is Life? We are deeply grateful to the MUUS Collection founders, Michael and Katya, and for making this partnership possible. As we continue this collaboration, we are proud to celebrate a shared commitment to supporting artists and creating meaningful opportunities for their work to be seen, discussed, and celebrated. Rosalind Fox Solomon's practice offers a profound and searching view of the human condition, and it is wonderful to gather in celebration of her work. A special thanks, of course, to Richard Grosbard and Sophie Wright for your friendship and collaboration. Thank you all for being here and for joining us for this important conversation. We are missing a key element of the conversation, but we know we'll be okay, and our best wishes to Michael Farmaghetti on his recovery from illness. It is also a pleasure and a privilege to announce today that MUUS will be launching on May 1st the MUUS Collection Research Fellowship, an initiative that will grant $20,000 to a mid-career academic or curator to work with the collection and within their archives. With that, I will now hand it over to Sophie. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Welcome, everyone. Lovely to see so many of you here on a very wet afternoon. My name's Sophie Wright. I'm Executive Director of MUUS Collection. This is actually my first APAD with MUUS Collection. So for those of you that don't know who we are, we're a collection of American 20th century photography. We're situated out in Tenafly, New Jersey, so it's such a pleasure to be here in person, to show some of our work, and to meet so many of you enthusiasts for Rosalind's pictures. MUUS Collection transforms archives by organizing and interpreting them, inviting study and illuminating our photographers' work through publication, exhibition, and strategic partnerships like this with APAD, and we're so grateful to APAD. Thank you again, Lydia. We currently look after the archives of André de Didion, who was best known for his early photographs of Marilyn Monroe, Larry Fink, who we showed here last year, very beloved, Rosalind Fox Solomon, who we're going to talk about today, Deborah Turbeville, and Alfred Wertheimer, along with other collection works. And our owner, Michael Sonnenfeld, as you know, joins us today, and we thank him for his vision. About Rosalind. This year, the fair has provided us the opportunity to celebrate the life and work of Rosalind Fox Solomon. Fox Solomon was an exceptional American artist celebrated for her incisive portraiture and bookmaking, who sadly passed away last summer at the age of 95. Taking up photography at 38, having raised 2 children, she traveled to New York City to study with the influential photographer Lisette Medel and never left. Our stand is curated using a selection of works from Fox Solomon's Chapalingus project, a book and exhibition produced in 2003, the closest she came to a retrospective in her lifetime. Using a selection of some of her favorite pictures, we conceived a presentation that would foreground the art of Fox Solomon's photography, both in the taking and editing of her work. Her contact sheets are the focus, with her final image selections, work prints, and a small selection of general ephemera that includes some of her journals. We hope it's whetted all your appetites for finding out more. We're delighted, actually, to confirm that there will be a touring retrospective of Rosalind's work, which is being planned with the Fondation Mapfre for 2028, and that will come to the US probably in 2029. So more on that soon. So the other way of seeing our work, not just here at the fair, is on our website, which we've newly relaunched. And I just wanted to mention the museum, which is an online research portal that we have launched as a beta phase at this point. But the aim of that is access, so that everyone can come in to our website, go online, and see and search through Deborah Turbeville's contact sheets, Rosalind Fox Solomon's work prints. So I urge you all to sign up and have a look. Now, without further ado, I must move on to our speakers. As I said, I joined MUUS Collection a year ago, and it's been such a delight for me to get to know the work of our photographers, but these two have so much depth and many years of knowing Rosalind's work. Richard Grosbard has been a collector, advisor, and champion of photography for more than 5 decades, and for over 45 of those years, he was a close friend and steadfast supporter of Rosalind Fox Solomon. He became her first collector, and in her own words, her favourite, ultimately acquiring more than 1,000 of her master prints. That long relationship and the depth of his collection were instrumental in helping MUUS Collection secure her archive, and in bringing her work to Paris Photo in 2022. He now serves as an advisor to both the MUUS Collection and the Rosalind Fox Solomon estate, roles that hold great personal meaning for him as he works to preserve and share her legacy. Marion Misilim is a master printer, photographic production manager and educator whose work bridges the technical and creative realization of fine art photography. Since 2016, she has collaborated closely with Rosalind Fox Solomon on the production and design of monographs and exhibitions, including Liberty Theatre, The Forgotten, and A Woman I Once Knew. With over 2 decades of experience supporting complex photographic projects for artists such as Gilles Perez, Hank Willis-Thomas, Laurie Nix, Laurie Novak, Elizabeth Kahane, Alison Corin, Alex Webb, and Rebecca Norris Webb, Misilim brings deep expertise in print production, artistic process, and collaboration. She's an adjunct instructor at NYU Tisch School of Arts, where she teaches advanced digital printing. So we're going to have a general conversation together, and then we will open up to the floor for a few questions. And I should just say that what you're going to see on the screen is a rolling selection of images, many of which are on our stand, others from the Chapalingus project. We do have all of her books on our stands. For those of you that haven't been there yet, we do urge you to come in and have a look. So the first question is a really basic one, really, which is to each of you individually. How did you first meet Rosalind Fox Solomon? And did that encounter set the tone for your ongoing relationship? I'll ask Richard first.
Okay, thank you, Sophie. It's really an honor to be here representing the MUUS Collection. And it's a very emotional moment for me because I've had this very interesting relationship with Rosalind for 48 years. And I feel like I'm going to have to go down memory lane and share some of these stories with you. So if the question is, when did I meet Rosalind? I met Rosalind when I was in my mid-20s. I had up to that point been collecting, very frankly, mostly 19th and mid-20th century photography. And I don't know, for those who don't know this little piece of photography history, there was a fantastic gallerist named Virginia Zabriskie. And she had a gallery here in New York and a gallery in Paris. And she was the first, one of the first champions of Rosalind's work. The other big champion was Gallery Sander. You know, August Sander's son was a champion of her work in Europe. So I had a relationship with Zabriskie Gallery, and Rosalind had a cocktail party in her home, which was across the street from Lincoln Center. And I remember my first encounter with Rosalind. You know, it's like, who are you? I'm like, well, I'm Richard Grosbard. I looked young. I was young at that point. And she quickly grilled me and saw that I did know something about photography. And I was like, okay, I passed the test, my first of many tests with Rosalind. And at the same time, I also met Richard Minsky, who's, if some of you may know, is the creator for the Center of Book Arts. And they had been collaborating on several projects because Rosalind was, what I would like to establish today, was much more than just a photographer. She was an artist, and she saw herself as an artist. So shortly after that, I guess she liked me, and she said, you come back tomorrow. We lived in the same neighborhood. I want you to look at my photography. And I did. And immediately started buying the photograph. The first day that I went there, I bought like 3-4 photographs. And so that was my beginning.
Thank you. Marion?
So I wound up meeting her through matchmakers, photographic matchmakers. There were a couple of people in our various circles that knew of me and then knew of her, and at various times they tried to connect us. And then when she was working on her Got to Go exhibition, that time it stuck. I came in and worked on these large prints, and when that was done, suddenly I found myself there more and just kind of like slipped right into the studio practice. And before I knew it, I was there, several times a week working with her on the next set of projects and things. And so much simpler, and then I just never left.
What stands out to you both in her approach to how she lived and to making her photography? I know that's a very big question, but I think there's some things that might
Would you
spring
like to go
mind.
first, Marion?
I can start. I guess the biggest metaphor is she was lucky enough to have a loft that was a live-work space. So living and working were the same things to her. And so that was part of the practice. We'd kind of often, the only barrier that we ever had was we had to close the doors to keep the cats out. The cats could not be part of the process, and little lady would just often perch herself outside there. So she would oversee us at all times.
She loved her cats.
Yeah.
Great. Richard?
So thinking back to when I first met Rosalind, she lived on the Upper West Side, as I said, across from Lincoln Center. And I remember one of the things that I will say, at that point, she sort of still lived a very luxurious lifestyle. And I remember she had a Wendell Castle desk that till this day I'm jealous of. That was amazing. It was like the first time I had seen the work of Wendell Castle. It was this monster desk, and on this monster desk, she would spread out her photographs and show you the work at that time. And then I remember, I guess in 83 or 84, she moved down to the NYU area, down on Broadway, and has a loft and all of a sudden went from this very luxurious lifestyle to a very austere lifestyle. It was a very clean, almost like a monk, or I don't want to use nun, but more monk style of a living. And on her walls were some amazing photographs that she had admired, Julia Margaret Cameron being one of them. She had a number of other very important photographers on the wall. And of course, Lisette, as Lisette was her teacher. And one thing about Rosalind, she was always ready with a cup of tea and ready to be very welcoming. And then it was like, let's get to work. And that's what I remember as that.
Are there words that you would use to describe her photographic perspective as we're looking at her photographs here? We know about the influence and importance of Lisette Medal. She taught her how to use flash. And Arbus is also referenced a little bit when you see her work, but I think there's a lot more of an empathetic eye, although a little bit of the same spikiness, perhaps. But Richard, is there anything?
Yes, it's very, so we had a very interesting relationship. I mean, I picked I actually helped her edit a number of our exhibitions. And I remember when I told her, I said, to me, the triumvirate of women photographers, starting with Lisette, was Lisette, Diane, and Rosalind. And it was just such a, easy trajectory because, Lisette also was the teacher of Diane Arbus. And for those who don't know, also Peter Hujar and Larry Fink, which is in the MUUS Collection. It's one of the reasons that I had suggested to Michael that we buy the Larry Fink collection because we did an exhibition in Paris Photo, and there's you can see the certain overlap between, not of style, but again, Rosalind was Rosalind and Larry was Larry. I'm trying to think the right words to say, but Rosalind had a very unique vision, and it was a singular vision, and I remember this. So I used to say to Rosalind, I want to promote you as, the third part of the triumvirate. She goes, oh, Diane Arbus had no effect on me. And that we went through this argument for 30 years. In the last 5 years, she says, Diane Arbus was a big influence on my life. I said, oh, it only took like 35 years to get there, but then she did recognize Diane, and she felt she was carrying the mantle. At that point, she was gracious about it, and she said, I would like to be part of this history.
Yeah. Were there any other photographers that she was sort of drawn to, or you say Juliet Mark Cameron was very important, for example.
Who else did she have up on the wall?
Well, she had Deanne and she had
Yes.
Larry.
Yes.
But she also had an array of other artists because she was very much into the works of other types of arts and in the theater, and all of those, I think, informed her. And a lot of books. Like, I would look at her collection of books, and you could see that those are the things that are informing what she was photographing and what she was thinking about.
I think that's a good point. So again, when I say that she was an artist, when you knew, it took her a while to, show her other artistic talents, but she was a poet. She started, incorporating poetry into her books. She did performance art back in 2014 and 2016. She had one performance, I remember, where she had a cellist playing while she was doing her poetry, and the photographs were like multimedia behind you, and it was very striking. It was a part of, I was on 23rd Street in the SVA Theater. And then another big champion of hers was Bruce Silverstein, who was her gallerist for many years. And she had a exhibition in his gallery, and they were very strong, to put it mildly. She was, as we know, at the end of her career, I don't know if you know her famous book where she did self-nudes, basically.
We'll get onto the book.
That's like,
that's the whole thing.
But she was always exploring. That was my point of that. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I remember reading that, she actually wanted to be a writer first.
Correct.
Before she was a photographer, and text also has always played a really important part in her bookmaking, but also she was a writer of huge amounts of journaling, and it was a real sort of expression for her, wasn't it?
Yes.
That it was. And I just remember, like, as we would work and text would be involved, the text would get pared down and down and down until they were like the photographs themselves.
Almost like haikus.
Little like haikus.
Yeah.
They'd tell you a little bit something, but then they wouldn't tell you a lot at all, and you had to kind of figure out the connection and the story behind them.
No, Richard told me off because I used the word documentary when I was thinking about the text for the exhibition, and I think it's very telling. And I come from a background at Magnum Photos, so that's where I got that word from. But it was definitely not a word that Rosalind wanted used in relation to her work, was it?
No, definitely not. So when we were discussing the work of Rosalind, I was telling Sophie, she really, excuse my language, but she was a ballsy person. Like, she would go into places that women, forget about men, but women was very challenging. If it was Peru, Guatemala, if it was India, it was South Africa. She would, be carrying like 60 pounds of equipment. So those of you know, carrying Hasselblad, her flash, all the accessory equipment. This is, remember, pre-digital, So there was all this extra equipment, and I'd ask her, did you have a guide? She goes, I had him, but I fired him after 2 days. And she would literally be carrying this equipment around in these various countries. That's something I remember clearly.
Yeah, and I guess to expand on that, like going in to take the pictures,
Yes.
she wouldn't want anyone else around. It
That's
was
right.
important that she had like the relationship with the people that she was photographing. It could be really short and fleeting, but it was important that it was just her and that other person, and all the other baggage that may come from someone helping her out, or a guide or an assistant. That was not part of it all.
Yeah, it's true.
So as we're looking at photographs of Rosalind's on the screen here, are there any, Richard, obviously as someone that really began collecting her work from a very, early stage, are there particular images that you were drawn to of hers?
It was very interesting. the first pictures that I bought from her were portraits, and portraits of children. And it was sort of I couldn't actually understand how this woman who's very tough and had this ability to take pictures of children that were unflinching, sort of probing into the child. And I'm wondering, like, how did she develop that relationship that this portrait would be so revealing about the character of the child? And it didn't matter if that child was in South Africa, if that child was in Peru, wherever, and especially in America. I don't want to, it's like I forget it. But, she did a very big, important body of work. As we all know about the AIDS work. Are we going to do you want to touch on that later?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the project that she's most known for,
Yes.
Portraits in the Time of AIDS. It was shown at the Grey Gallery in 1989, I think.
Yes.
88.
89, yeah.
That's actually now in the original set is in the National Gallery in Washington. And it's perhaps her most sort of short form in project. So it was done in a relatively short period of time.
2 years.
And it's got quite a tight narrative for obvious reasons. And it's a very diverse group of images. And again, she repeats the same subjects. It's not just one portrait per person.
Right.
And I think what was interesting was that she chose to present them as very, very large format prints. These were done pre-digital, weren't they?
Pre-digital in her loft, yeah.
So how big were they? They were like about 1.5
36
meters, something
inches
like that.
by 36
Yeah.
inches, somewhere around there.
And just pinned up to the walls as well, so quite a kind of
Well, what I'd like to add to that is people who lived in New York, if you remember, there was a big stigma to being in a room with somebody who had AIDS. There was this belief that when the AIDS really broke out full-blown in New York and in San Francisco, that you could maybe catch AIDS, just in the air. And most people shunned the community, even those people who were friends of, people who had AIDS. And Rosalind took pictures not of only men, but also of women and of children that had contracted AIDS. And she, like you said very well, created relationships, went back to visit them. There was a real sense of compassion for the suffering that she saw during those years. It was I remember, because I had a friend myself who had died of AIDS during that period, and most people would not go into the hospital, like they knew NYU was one of the hospitals that supported a lot of the care for these patients. It was really a terrible stigma. But Rosalind, like everything, like going wherever she ever went, she could full force, do the tough work, be honest about the work. And all those patients or people who had contracted AIDS really connected with her on a very unusual level. It's very interesting. It's the way we think of Diane Arbus's work, how she connected with her models, not models, but the people that she met. Rosalind had this ability to connect with these people that was very touching.
So also within her work, Rosalind would bring an audio recorder with her at times, different places for her projects. But this, in the case of the AIDS project, she felt that it was much more important, and she knew that they really wanted to share their stories, because a lot of them had lost contacts with their families, friends, and they were very ostracized, and they wanted their stories to be known. So she has an extensive archive from a lot of the people that she photographed with AIDS who shared their stories with how this affected relationships with their families, how the illness was affecting them, how hard it was to get treatment. And really that's also part of the work that the National Gallery also has, but it was a slightly different relationship than a lot of other people that she photographed because of the level of intimacy that was needed for them to open up and to share.
Yeah. No, it's an incredible body of work. There's a couple of images from it on our stand with the contact sheets if anyone wants to come up and have a look. I should also say that there are also images of quite a lot of children. In fact, I mean, the focus of our stand is mostly portraiture, because I think that's probably one of her strongest subjects. Are there any particular images from the selection on the stand that you recall that you
I'll let you go again.
Well,
Please.
I'll start because it's
Yeah.
actually Len Martelli and his parents.
Yeah.
And that is from Portraits in the Time of AIDS. And then I remember, like, we've worked on it a couple of times, making some reprints, and we would talk about it. And then just, you could see the relationship between him and his parents and the look that they have towards each other and that kind of grouping, and he's ahead and they're behind, and the garden back behind them is dark. And then we would work, there's this one little rose that we would work to bring out within the print. And that picture becomes more emotional for me every single time that I look at it, because I see more of that dynamic and that interplay of what is in the recordings, they're in those pictures.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm trying to think, it's like, so.
Talk about one that you are.
I know, I'm just thinking, I own the master prints of 1,000 prints, and they're all my favorite children, So it's like, so I'm trying to think, the
You were
one that I like
mentioning-
understand. I know which one I like, though.
Okay.
I will tell you, I will share it with you, is the boy with the rooster.
Yeah.
And I hope it's a rooster or is it
Yes.
a chicken? Okay, right, it's a rooster. Okay, shows you know what about chickens and roosters. But anyway, there's something about that. If anybody's seen that shot, I don't know if we have it up here on the screen. But the rooster is, this boy's holding this rooster, and this is his beloved pet. And he has he's a little, his eyes are a little bit cross-eyed. And there's something about the intimacy of catching the love of this unusual pet. And you can see him struggling to hold the rooster that doesn't jump out of his arms. And what I like is, and that's one I think that you see when I stop and I think about this, there's a tension always in Rosalind's photos. And that little tension of the rooster, or the tension of the boy who's holding What is Life, or I don't know if we have, I can't remember every shot in the exhibition, but there was the girl of holding the flowers. And there's something about the relationship that they have with the object or the animal or something in that picture that creates a tension between the two of them that she somehow captures between light and structure. So a lot of times when I look at this photograph, I have to just point out, you saw the bath shot? That with everybody in the bath, I'd have to back out of this a second. So that was maybe
I was thinking about that one.
That's like my second photo that I bought from Rosalind, because every time Rosalind would come back from a trip, she would call me up to help her edit the photos, and also to, of course, buy some photos. And that one with the bath is very unusual because nobody has ever been able to photograph. That's in Guatemala. It's a private bath. Nobody's ever been able to go into those private baths and do that. And when you go in, you can see they look so comfortable with Rosalind. I just can't imagine where she was sitting. But that's one of my favorite group portraits, I have to say that. But going back again, these tensions of using light, using what Larry Fink also used, this flash and just composition. It's an amazing thing. As you can tell,
I think the contact sheets are really helpful in understanding her approach to portrait making, and how she also talked about the fact that she was like she was an older lady, she was a very unthreatening sort of person in her approach to her subject. So
She'd wear a floppy hat, she'd have the photo vest, look a little bit like maybe...
a bit goofy.
A little bit goofy, very approachable, like this is someone's grandmother who just wants to take a picture, so... why not?
Yeah, she knew how to put her subjects at ease.
Yeah.
We've got so much to talk about. We've only got 16 minutes left. So let me move on. Marion, I think it'd be lovely to hear from you. You worked alongside Rosalind in the studio for a long time, and we're obviously party to a lot of her major book projects. I think what's really fascinating about Rosalind is, although there was the Grey Art Gallery catalogue, she was working on book arts, but she really didn't start her book making as a sort of published book until, I think, Chapalingus, which was the 2003 Steidl book, which our stand is edited from. And that was a wildly conceptual sort of project. It was a kind of retrospective, but it was thematic. It was bouncing around her work. And it had a title which wasn't even a word, that was a sort of misspelling of grasshopper, which again talks about that bouncing around her work. But I mean, I think what's fascinating about the way, and this is where she's really anti-documentary, is in some ways she is talking about time and place in a different way. But you know, her bookmaking began with that, and then really subsequently became about that combination of images and text to create an overall kind of mood and story. But there wasn't like it was not a simple sort of one after another chronology that she created. They sort of layered up over the period of a book. And this was a relationship that she really sort of developed with Michael Mack, right through to the book that you referenced, Richard, A Woman I Once Knew, which won the Oral Book Award and the Paris Photo Book Award last year. But Marion, back to you. We don't have Michael here, and that's why we wanted Michael here, to just talk a little bit more about the publishing, because Aperture obviously worked on a number of features. They are actually publishing some work by Rosalind that hasn't been published before, her Eggleston portfolio in their summer magazine, which is lovely. They also worked on the New York feature. Were you in the studio when that was happening? It'd be lovely to hear a little bit about that. How collaborative was she? And you talked about that a little bit as well in the act of editing her images.
I think it depends. It like ebbs and flows when someone's open to it and when someone wants to pull something out. So New York came about because it was in COVID, and so it was this idea, and she has a wealth of pictures from New York. And so she would start, actually not at all from the contact sheets. The entire time I was there, the contact sheets were very rarely brought out of those drawers. And we started from the work prints because we had boxes and boxes of 8x10 work prints, all with locations. And she would say, you know, this is how I find them, but you know, I'm not making a location-based project. So here comes a location-based project. We pull out the work prints, and she pulls out, I don't remember, quite a mass of it. And then Michael would come in, and then her editing process was always very intimate. It was either with herself or with one other person. And so when Michael came in, I was not there. It was about her relationship with Michael. And then they would work through and make a selection, and that would repeat until, you know, you got the set of images, and then we would work on digitizing and scanning anything that might need to be for publication and present them in that way, and then work on the details and the nuances and the relationships within every photograph.
Yeah, it's been really interesting working with you with the work prints. Marion's been in the archive, and it was clearly, that was really her main source material, wasn't it? And actually, the archive came into the MUUS Collection during Rosalind's lifetime, and the thing that she wanted to hold on to, and the agreement was that she could always hold on to those work prints. So they came to us after she passed away, because they were her main source material to kind of think through her work, weren't they? Yeah, and very beautifully printed, I have to say. In many cases, very, very lovely silver gelatin prints.
Yeah, because they would serve as guides for larger iterations or the digital versions of them.
I think if you have not been to the stand yet, it's very important that the outside wall as you're looking towards the bar area, Sophie did a very clever thing, I have to say, I liked a lot when we were putting this together, is she shows you the back of the prints. So on my master prints especially, this was like something that she would spend literally 2-3 days on a print. And when you read the back of it, it's like calligraphy. There's like maybe 20, 30 notations of where the burning was done, where she decided to emphasize a certain part of the picture over another part. And I do recommend that you go and see that, because I thought that was a great idea to show you what it means, not just also from the contact print to the work print to the final print, but to see the back of the print is really was a very special idea that I thought. You know, I worked with her, I would say, on 5 books. So and this is kind of amusing to me because she was very private. She had like different levels of people that she would consult. I have PDFs. I was looking at my emails last night preparing for this talk, and I would get PDFs, and she would say, we'd start with 300 pictures. And so I would whittle it down to 100 with some of these books. And then we'd be like, well, why did you take out those? I said, because we only have 100, hopefully, pictures to put in the book. But she listened, and it's interesting. Then Michael Mack did a great job over the years as far as finishing the final touches. But it was a process that was taken over many days, and just the same way that she would do her printing of many days, she would also do her editing over many days. So when I look back at my PDFs where I marked off yes, no, no, and to get back like, oh, put that one back in. I said, okay, we'll put that one back in. But she was very fastidious about everything she did. That's, I would say, that's something I cannot emphasize enough. The amount of care that she took, the love she had for her subjects, and the importance of getting the light right on these prints. I mean, she really was a master printer. And having said that, Marion, of course, was very instrumental, but she always worked with master printers. What's his name? Chuck Kelton. I don't know. For those who are, know photography in this room and know the work of Chuck Kelton, master printer. I think he shows at Allison Bradley right now. Worked with her for 10 years. They would spend like 2-3 days on a print. Who does that? I mean, think about that today. So, when I look at these prints, it's more like the print as an object than just print as an image. So, that was an integral part of this whole process.
Yeah, there's a huge rigor to her whole photographic process, and I would say that probably of the archives that we have, hers came to us in the most organized form. I'm conscious of time, but I did want to just finish up by talking about, obviously, her last book, which I think is such a radical, frankly, punk book for a 94-year-old woman to produce, a woman I once knew. This was the book I referred to, which was the book award at Paris Photo last year. And I think it really just sums up her she applied the same unflinching gaze on herself as an aging woman through the portraiture that she sort of displayed in that book to the kind of approach that she took to everyone else. But I think back to this idea of her being cross mediums, it includes stills from videos. Mm-hmm. Video is something else she worked in, is that right? That's
yes.
another medium that she explored.
Yes.
There were some camera phone images in there. It's really quite a radical departure from her black and white sort of classic printing. Is there anything you can recount from the process of making it?
Of a woman I once knew?
Yeah.
At that part of her life, she knew going into it that this would be her last book. She said, I have nothing else to say, and, everyone else will make other types of books of my work. And she knew, she knew that she was approaching the end, and she was, in some ways, letting go. She's like, I made these for myself with no thinking about things, working things out for myself, and she had never had any intention, even within her lifetime, for them to be shown. And it was a process of letting go. It was something a little bit outside of herself, and I think that also became a little bit more collaborative with Michael Mack than I had seen in the previous two books, to get kind of a different perspective from it, because it was really letting go and trying to find things both in the images and in the words to bring out. And it was the first project that we did go back in some cases to the contact sheets, because work prints hadn't been made of a lot of things. And then even more recently, because she had shot as recently as 2019 for this, and so we were right there looking at those contacts to bring them out as well.
Yeah, it was a real radical act, that book, I think.
So I have a very vivid memory when I had asked her, up to this point I had seen all her books and all the PDFs before, and I asked to see this book, and she goes, I don't know if I can show this book to you right now. And I was like, why? She goes, well, it's very strong. And as a matter of fact, when Michael and I were at the memorial, she told a very funny story, of her grandson. She showed this book to her grandson, and these are very, very thank you. It's graphic photos of Rosalind, fully naked, a woman in her 90s, and such. And her grandson told a very cute story where she sat it down next to her grandson and said, "Look at this book with me." And he's looking at his grandmother completely, not only naked with legs open and what have you. And he said, and he was very funny. He said, imagine sitting with your grandmother, you know, and seeing this. But that was Rosalind. That was like, she wanted to hear a young person's opinion about the work, and she wasn't really concerned about the age or what have you. But that book, I think of, you know, the work of Copeland, you know, who did this male nudes, and I remember the controversy when he did that, and he was probably in his 50s or 60s. That was very accepted. But this book was, of course, challenged, because why would a woman, you know, an aging woman, show her body, you know, to the world? But that was Rosalind. It was like her, you know, sort of her.
It's her life and her work.
There were three words I was going to, two words I was going to use, but I don't want to use them. But it was like this, you know, to the world. Like, this is who I am. Matter of fact, I don't know if you noticed the picture with the two fingers on her mouth. That's part of that book, and that particular portrait, you know, I've told Sophie what that meant to me. It was that secretive part of Rosalind, and that you knew her, but you didn't know her. Rosalind, you know, was not an easy person to work with, but the more you got to know her, the more you accepted, and I will even say loved her. And I have to say, I miss her to this day. You know, she was a very big part of my life then. You know.
Thank you, Richard. I think that's a very good place to end, and I'm very conscious we have very little time for questions, but it's so hard to sum up such an extraordinary woman in such a short period of time. I hope you all find out more about her. Would anyone like to ask one or two questions? I think we might have a little bit of time left.
Hi, thank you very much for this beautiful talk. It's been very insightful. I just have a question about her process, just going a little bit more into depth. So from what I understand is a lot of her projects kind of fell out of the work that she created, but how much preparation went into a project before she embarked on a trip or something like that?
Well, I think, so largely by the time I was there, she wasn't traveling quite as much, but from what I know is that there was always a lot of research. If you looked on her bookshelves, if she was going to Peru or Guatemala, there was books and books and books. And so she wanted to know, because she had worked with the experiment in international living in her younger days, and that fostered cultural exchanges and exchange from people all around the world living in different cultures. So she was very much interested in it and did the research and got to know the things. And also because once you're there, you have to know a little bit of something in order to be able to go and function and make her way. And so she spoke Spanish, so that was beneficial for sure in the Latin American countries. And sometimes she would have guides who would help her with the particulars of the local culture. And I do remember reading through her journals, one where she was in India, and she had one guide in one region of India. And at first she thought, well, I'm gonna, he's gonna go to a different region with me. And then she said, no, I can't take you because that region is completely different. It's a different kind of culture. I'm gonna have to find someone over there. So she was very sensitive to these things, and she was very well researched.
You know, so I actually helped her pack before some of these trips. And you're talking about, I don't even know how she carried all this stuff, but it would be from where this carpet here is to here, and it would be all laid out, and she was very meticulous the way she would pack it. She was organized, she was prepared, she had backups and such. And she was already, at this point, when I met her in the 55, 60, carrying this amazing amount of equipment. And she was basically prepared for any emergency, I have to say that. And she, like everything in her life, she was very organized and very careful how she prepared for things.
I have a question for Marion. You were talking about her being a master printer in her own right, and then you joining her much later in her career. And I wonder what that relationship is like too, especially, we could obviously have the conversation of analog to digital, but I don't even think that's the conversation. What is it like to share a creative space with someone who is so skilled and so invested in the printmaking process and come in being there to now collaborate with her on those projects. Could you speak about how she did that? How, as an artist, she welcomed a printer into her process?
Yeah, so whether it was me or others who might have come before me, she was always working hand in hand, and she had very specific relationships within the photographs that she would draw out. So we would sit there, we would lighten, darken things to emphasize the connection between, say, a print in a piece of clothing and perhaps the background, or we would look at the print together and then discover something that was buried within the shadows that we didn't see before that we would bring out. And so even though digital, you see what you see on the screen, there were still many work prints going by. That process translated from analog to digital. We started again with 8x10s. We looked to the original 8x10s, but then subsequently made more 8x10s. And then sometimes things would go in a direction that we weren't happy with, and then the next day we would start all over again. So you just had to be open to kind of revisiting it and developing a relationship with that image to know where it was going to go and ultimately land.
I think we're very lucky at the MUUS Collection to have the work prints, 60,000 work prints. When you work with a collection of that size and you see some of the key images, and you will see how many times she printed to just get one section of the photograph correct. So what we have in our collection is truly the story of a printer, and one thing that was very clear, she always worked with somebody. She didn't work alone. She had very specific ideas, and I pity some of those printers before that came hand, but she would really get, very detailed oriented. So all I can say is that MUUS Collection has, thanks to Michael Sonnenfeld and Katja Goldman, have brought this collection in hands that where researchers can come in, galleries can come in, and this museum show, which is, I have to tell you, it's been her lifelong dream. I only wish she was alive today to see this amazing international show that will be running, starting in Barcelona, going to Madrid. We actually have probably like 8 venues traveling around the world in the next, starting in 2028 and such. And I hope that everybody's going to get an opportunity to come and see the work that we're doing.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone.